In the first years of the Fourth Age, when King Elisar Telcontar healed the land and the white tree grew again in the courts of Minas Tirith, a rumor out of the north came sliding down the long roads like a shard of ice. Men of Dale spoke in whispers in the market. Dwarves from Erebor kept a stony silence that told more than speech. They named an unseen stronghold, veiled by unmelting snows, in the shoulders of the Grey Mountain, arid Mithrin, where winter thundered without storm, and lights went like pale fish under glass. I was there to hear it. My name is Calanhir of Lebanon, a humble scribe in service to the king. I had copied many a brittle leaf in the houses of lore, and thought myself born only to the ink pot. Yet the rumor found me in the seventh circle, and with it a summons, come to the king. It is a peril to disobey, and a greater peril to be remembered. Elisar's gaze was keen, like cold sunrise on Mindalluin. We have peace, he said, and still the past sends roots through the present. There is talk of a hidden city under the Grey Mountain, not of dwarves alone, nor of orcs, for their kind is much diminished, but of men and elf mingled. The name they give it is Snowspire. He bade me go, not alone. Seek counsel in Imladris, where Elrond once held wisdom, though his house is silent now. Ride through Rohan and Lorien, if Lorien will receive you, and pass north by the river running. If there is a city of winter that never thaws, I would know which hand shaped its gates. So I bowed, and in my foolish courage straightened my pack. The city of kings lay bright around us, and if I had known how far the shadow of the Grey Mountains would reach, I might have clung to stone and sunshine longer. But the future holds itself close, and a man learns its breadth only by walking. The companions gathered one by one like stars that will not be counted until dusk. First was Edric of the Eastfold, tall and sun-brown, with the laughter of horses in his voice. "My Lord King aids our herds and hall," he said. And so Rohan rides when Gondor asks. Also, I have never seen a mountain I did not wish to climb. In Lothlorien, we found Lerwin, of the Wardens whose cloaks still took the green of leaf, though few leaves remained. The Lady Galadriel was long gone over sea, and Caras Galadon drowsed. Lerwin's eyes, however, were lamplight. "The North keeps old memories," she said, "and Lorien forgets too swiftly. I will go." From Erebor came Doran, son of Nar, copper-bearded and close-set, bearing the mark of the Ravenhill upon his helm. "The Grey Mountains bit my grandsire," he said curtly. "Cold drakes once gnawed there. If stone is ill set, or treasure ill-guarded, I would set it right. In Bree we took up Halion, a ranger of the north, spare and weathered like hewn ash. He bore no sign but his quiet. The kings of old walked the wild," he said, "and though a crown sits again in the south, there is still much wandering to do." Of his years and kin he said little. Of the lands between Star and Fir he knew much. Last, in the Green Dragon at Bywater, we found a hobbit with a pack too large for his size and a grin too large for his face. "Togo Brandybuck, at your pie-crust service," he declared. "I'm on an errand for my cousin in Bucklebury, who insists there's a mention, only a whisper, in the Red Book's back leaves about a city of snow. Imagine that. Well, I thought it needed checking. 6 we were: Gondor, Rohan, Lorien, Erebor, the North, and the Shire. Not the 9 of old, not the fellowship remembered in song, but a company bound by curiosity and a winter name. We rode the horse plains of the Mark, where banners snap and the wind ran clean out of the west. Eomer King sent us meat and cheer, and in his hall men spoke respectfully of snows that swallowed horns and men alike. But laughter returned easily there, and the shadow of the north was kept beyond the mead. Between the eaves of Lorien and the Anduin, we moved in soft footfall. The golden wood was pale now, a dream of itself under sun. Yet Lerwin sang low to trunks that remembered silver and starlight, and the trees, those that still would, sang back. "South passes," she said, "are watched by memory. The north keeps other watcher." At the old forest road, the world grew dim. Mirkwood bore a new name, Aaron Las Galen, the wood of green leaves, and yet the roots knew of Dol Guldur. and would not soon forget. We paid toll in patience and silence. Once, a thrumming cry went through the boughs and was answered, far away, by another. Doran muttered, "Cold drakes sometimes test their wings. They do not love daylight, but neither do they sleep forever." We crossed the river running at Dale, where Bard's line flourished, and children chased across cobbled roofs. The mountains shone with new-worked doorways, and dwarfish masons laughed in their beards. Doran traded oaths there, and we took furs and iron-studded boots. "For the gray mountains bite the feet they cannot hold," he warned. By then, the sky had that northern clarity that tastes of iron. The land rose by slow degrees, and the wind, though clean, forgot its gentleness. We left paths for game tracks, and tracks for guesses, and guesses for Halion's listening. He rode ahead, as if the air spoke to him, and sometimes he raised a hand, and we would see, a mile off, the ice breath of a hidden ravine. First came wolves, not lean but heavy-coated, and they walked in day as if night had borrowed them. Edric's spear took two. Doran's axe spoke once, with the thundery certainty of dwarven steel. Lerwin's arrow flickered, and a third fell as if sleep had overtaken it. Yet more waited, their eyes like chips of old glass. They did not charge. They kept the same distance always, as if measuring us for coffins of snow. "Them's not natural," Togo said prudently, keeping close to my stirrup. "My Uncle Merrimack always said, 'When a wolf looks like a question, go home.'" No one turned south. On the fifth day, the land tilled up into broken white. We passed between pillars of rime that tinkled like bells with every faint wind, and the ground boomed under hoof, hollow as if bridges lay beneath us. Halion went on foot and laid his palm to the ice. "Listen," he whispered. We held our breath. Under us, a sound like distant surf, but colder. A vast, slow grinding, as of doors rolled on frozen hinges. A road, Doran judged at last, his brows knotted. Not of stone as dwarves fashion it, of ice shaped by a master hand. That night, the wolves at last ventured a cry. It did not break the silent dome of the sky. It slithered along it, a thread of sound seeking a knot to tighten. Lerwin cast white fire upon the snow and sang in Sindarin words that I did not know. The cry unraveled, snagged, and faded. "Old wards," she said, "old watchers. At dawn we saw it, not by sight first, but by the ache in our bones, a pressure like the air before a hammer falls." The slope bent up into a scarp of glassy ice, veined faintly with blue. Along its face ran a pattern of pale light, shifting as frost flowers shift when breathed upon. The middle was shaped not by avalanche, nor by sun. A gate tall as the Mindalluin towers, with lintel and jambs fluted like icicles. Across it lay a bar of snow-white metal, thicker than a man's thigh, held by clasps that resembled the talons of some vanished bird. "White steel?" Edric murmured. "Not steel," Doran answered, his eyes gone distant. "A winter work. The dwarves of the north forged such with elven lore in the elder days, when they warred with cold drakes and feared what lurked beneath them. It is called thunder snow, made where lightning falls upon pure drift." "How do we open it?" I asked, for my hands were already numbing with the nearness of that gate. Lerwin set a palm to the lintel and sang again. The sound went thin, swallowed by the white. Halion crouched and looked for rune, but there were none. "It listens for a name," he said quietly. Then Togo stepped forward, uncertain but stubborn, and spoke. "Narthamrad." We stared. The word fell like a pebble down a long shaft, and far below struck something that rang. The clasps uncurled, the bar lifted by its own weight, and slid aside with a chime that turned the wolves' courage. They fled in yelping wheels across the slopes. Togo's face went crimson. "It was in the red book," he said, an old gloss in the margin, hardly a thumb's length, the word for a winter door built together by elf and dwarf. I thought it might be worth a try. The gate sighed inward. We entered the cold. Snowspire proved no legend of airy spires and glass towers. It was a city, carved within a glacier, whose heart never melted. Halls of blue light and pale shadows, arches like frozen surf, shafts that drank the day and turned it to dusk. Crystalline buttresses crossed like the ribs of whales. Bridges arched over gulfs of trapped sky. I had never thought ice could be majestic without cruelty. Yet here was craft that married cold to calm. There were dwellings, cells cut smooth, with niches holding crystal lamps. There were galleries of tools wrought of winter metal. There were carvings, oh, the carvings, of leaves and beasts and ships, all in frost so delicate it seemed breath might break them. No folk moved there, but the city had not been empty long. A bowl lay overturned where someone had startled. A neat row of boots stood waiting in a passage. We found signs of both hands, elven grace in the line of bridges and the shaping of light, dwarven stoutness in the ribs and roots, and the marks of men, practical and various. A child's game scratched on the floor, a bench placed where it would catch the sun's stray. "It is not made to stand forever," Doran murmured, tracing a seam that ran the length of a pillar. "It is made to move." "To move?" I repeated. "The ice flows like a river that thinks in centuries," Lerwin said, laying her ear to the shining blue. "They have cut a city into its current. Each year it shifts, each decade bends. Snowspire will never be where it was." Halion had gone quiet as a hunting owl. He scanned every shadow. "If they fled, who hunted them?" he asked. "Or what woke?" Edric said grimly, pointing to gouge marks along a corridor, each as long as my arm, each ending in a little plume of shattered frost. In the deepest hall, we found a chamber like a seed crystal, six-sided and pure. There a great slab of thunder snow rested in a cradle of ice, and upon it lay lines burned by some cold flame. Lerwin and Doran read them together, stumbling, arguing, and translating, until the story stood clear. After the breaking of Beleriand and the wars with Morgoth, after Numenor rose and fell, there were among the faithful a handful who feared not the returning of a Dark Lord, so much as the return of the world to his wounds. They wandered the north in the early days of Arnor, seeking places where the earth remembered pain. With them went dwarves from the Blue Mountains, who knew the speech of stone, and elves from the woods that would become greenwood, who knew the songs that lengthen light. They found a shard, hidden not in fire, but in coal, a splinter of the Iron Crown that once held the Silmarils, or so they named it in metaphor, if not in fact. It had fallen into high snow and cooled there through ages. It gave no heat, it drank heat. Where it lay, summers dulled and winters lengthened. They feared it not for malice, though malice clung to it, but for patience. And so they built Snowspire to keep watch. They called themselves the Winter Keepers. The ledger told of oaths, men, elf, and dwarf binding each to each with words that rang like picks on ice. No single folk would be left to fall alone should the shard stir. The city would travel with the glacier, forever hidden, forever present, and each generation would teach the next the name that opened the gate. But near the end, the writing went broken. The last hands spoke of a stirring in the shard, called not a shard at last, but the heart of winter, and of whispers in dream, promises of peace without change, snow that would never blacken, a world held in a clear pause forever. Some took hope in that, others took fear. The ledger stopped. "Not destroyed," Doran muttered. "It may be beyond destroying," Lerwin answered, "but not beyond choosing." We found them the next day, the folk of Snowspire, or those who had remained, 70 souls in a cavern ringed with frost pines that had somehow grown inside the ice. They were wary at first, but they took Lerwin's song as a pledge and Doran's name as a token. Their chief was a spare woman named Arandis, with hair white as frost rime, though she was not aged. They wore garments sewn with shining thread, and their eyes held a patient watchfulness like mountain hares. They told us what we already guessed. The heart of winter had deepened its call. It lay beneath their city, not stone, but something like stone, clear and dark together, through which the light of the world passed and was slowed. Standing above it, they said, "You heard not sound, but the lack of it." Some among them had begun to listen too long. "Where is it?" Halion asked at once. Arandis studied him, as if the question were a knife she weighed. "In the root chamber, where the glacier takes its counsel," she said at last. "Once we visited as guardians. Now we visit only to count the cracks in the seals." We asked to see it, and there they hesitated. Then Togo, who had kept quieter than any hobbit ought, stepped forward and unlaced from his neck a small charm of white metal. "My grandmother's grandmother found this in the North Farthing hedges," he said. "She said it came to the Shire with dwarves in leaner days. It bears the winter mark." On the charm, under his thumb, was the same fluting we had seen on the Gate of White Thunder. Arandis took it and turned it, and a quick grief went through her. "My brother wore such," she said, "when he went to seek counsel in the south, with tidings of our failing seal. He did not return." Togo looked up, eyes suddenly large and unchildish. "Then I think I must have a longer tale to tell, and one which is not mine alone." So in the blue chamber lit by fixed lamps, the twist came plain. Togo was not only a Brandybuck errand runner, he was the last of a line once counted among the Winter Keepers. A family of hobbits who had pioneered north from Bree in the elder days, yearned toward hills and quiet. They had been messengers between Snowspire and the southern roads when Arnor was young. Later they turned back toward warmer field. The Shire called them home, but they had kept the charm, and with it a memory like a buried seed. His cousin, poring over the Red Book, had found a name. His aunt had told a story, and the seed had sprouted. Arandis bowed to him as to a kinsman restored. Doran snorted with a good dwarf's pleasure. Edric clapped Togo's shoulder. Lerwin's eyes softened. Only Halion held himself still as a column of ice. We descended by ways chiseled in blue, beneath galleries of frozen light. Snowspire groaned softly around us, not in fear but in movement. The glacier breathed, and the city breathed with it. At last, we came to a place so cold, it seemed warmth had never been invented. The chamber was a bowl, polished to a pure curve. In its center lay a thing like a lens of midnight, glass, not glass, stone, not stone, through which the world seemed to slow. There were the seals, rings of thunder snow, 3 upon 3, inlaid with the mingled runes of elf and dwarf and the common tongue of men. The air above them trembled slightly, and a faint music was present only by absence, like the echo of a bell that had never been struck. "It is beautiful," said Lerwin, and her voice was dangerous. "It is a trap," said Doran, and his voice was safe. Edric took one step forward, then back. "It feels like the moment before a horse," he murmured. And Halion, who had seemed carved, moved like a man thrown by a hidden rope. He stepped to the rim and placed both hands upon the seal. They did not burn him. His face went younger and older at once. "Lerwin," he said softly without looking up, "do you hear how quiet the world could be?" "Halion!" I cried, and went to seize his shoulder. Under my hands, he felt not cold, but very still, like a tree in winter, with life asleep beneath the bark. "Stop," Arandis said quietly, and a dread settled like fine snow upon my heart. But she spoke not to me. She spoke to Halion. He raised his head then, and in his eyes, which I had always thought gray, there was a fixed white, like frost inside glass. "You speak with the voice I learned as a boy," he said to Arandis, and now we all heard the other note in his voice, the echo of something older. In Fornost, I listened to the winter stones when the houses were only bone. The heart spoke more sweetly. Togo made a sound of grief and recognition, and from under his shirt he drew not only the charm, but a thin chain wound many times. On it hung, wrapped in tan cloth, a small fragment of clear dark. "My cousin found what she thought a trinket embedded in a field ice," he said in a rush. "We thought it only pretty and dead, until it sang to some in dream. We sent our elder to return it north. He did not come. His voice broke. I took it. I hid it. I thought if I brought it to Snowspire, it would be made right." Halion's gaze fixed on the bundle. The frost in his eyes brightened. "The heart called you, little kinsman," he said, and his voice had such gentleness that I shivered. "And you came. The winter keeps its promise." "Who are you?" I asked Halion, though I feared to hear. "I am Halion," he said, and then, with a weariness that sounded older than the world, and I am the listener. The winter keepers were not all keepers. Some were kept. We bound ourselves to guard peace, and in the binding peace bound us, and in that stillness the heart learned a voice. It borrowed mine. The North has many kings in memory. I am none of them. I am only a man who stood too long in silence until silence wore his name. The seals quivered, as though breath had passed across glass. Above us, the glacier answered, a low report like drums in deep caves. From the outer halls there came a cry that was no cry at all, the sound of air breaking, of something large forcing itself through tight space. The cold drake had come. It clove through the ice like a black knife under milk. Its scales shone not with heat, but with a dull light that seemed stolen from the day. Its eyes were beads of winter night, and on its breath the air itself cracked. Snowspire's folk took up pikes of thunder snow. Doran rose with a shout that sounded like a horn in Khazad-dûm, and Edric leapt forward with a horseman's joy. Lerwin's arrows glanced from the drake's hide and turned to glitter that fell like a brief rain. It laughed without sound. I, who had no weapon but words, went to Togo and seized the wrapped fragment. It was not hot, it was less than cold. Where it pressed my palm, feeling fled. "Give it to me," Helion murmured, standing very still, hands on the seal. "If the shard is returned to the heart, the music will complete. The city will become a single note. All hurt will stop. And all change," Lerwin said, half in dream, half in warning. "And all change," Helion agreed softly. The drake came down upon us in a sliding rush. Its jaws opened not to bite, but to devour warmth. Doran sprang and set his axe into the seam beneath its chin, where scale met scale, and Edric drove a spear upward past the dwarf's shoulder, and Lerwin sang a word that cracked the air in answer. The creature recoiled, surprised. Even winter can be wounded. "Choice," Arandis said then, as if reading a page that only she could see. "That is all any oath returns to in the end." She drew a knife of winter metal and cut her own palm. Her blood smoked in the cold and fell in dark drops upon the seals. The rings blazed, not with flame, but with a clarity like noon on new snow. The heart thrummed. Helion shuddered. I saw him then, as if the frost in his eyes were a mask thinning, a man in whom endurance had been turned to stone by too much vigil. "Helion," I said, my voice shaking. "Old friend of empty roads," stepped back. He looked at me, truly looked. Then he bowed his head, as if under a crown too heavy to bear. "I am so tired of winter," he whispered. "Things happened then, as quickly as falling glass, and as slowly as drift building on a roof." Doran roared a dwarven word and hewed the drake's jaw, snapping 2 teeth that sang away like slingstone. Lerwin's last arrow found that small wound and entered, and for the first time the creature made a sound, a crackling sob, like the smashing of ice in spring. Edric, laughing through terror, dragged me and Togo toward the rim of the seals. "Decide, scribe," he cried. "Words bite sharper than spears now." Arandis held her bleeding hand over the rings and sang as her forebears had sung, calling men and elf and dwarf by their oldest name. The seals answered, and the heart, hearing its keepers unbroken, faltered in its call. The peace Togo bore trembled in my hands like a bird that cannot decide to fly. Helion stepped away at last. He left frost where his hands had rested, prints as clear as coins in new snow. "Do not return it," he said into the tremor. "If you do, the stillness will drown bright things quietly." "How then?" I asked. "We cannot keep divided what once was whole, not forever. It will sing again." "Then change the song," Lerwin said, and her voice was like early leaf. "Winter is not the enemy of spring. It is the mother of it." Doran glanced over his shoulder, face lit by the cold fire of struggle. "Speak your lore quick, elf," he grunted. "Break the rings that bind the heart inward," Lerwin answered, "and forge new rings that bind it outward, to the world, to thaw and freeze, to the tide of season. Let it be not a prison, but a hinge." "Can such be done?" Arandis asked. "It can be begun," said Doran. already setting his axe to the outermost of the 9 seals. And when dwarves begin, men will finish, and elves will remember the way. Togo looked up at me then, eyes brave and small. Callan here, will you write the new words? I will, I said, and bleed upon them if need be. We shattered 3 rings and reforged 3, with shards of thunder snow, and the swift cunning of hands made desperate. Arandis sang, Lerwin wove, Doran hammered with the butt of his axe. Edric held the drake at bay and laughed when laughter seemed madness. Togo set the little shard not back into the heart, but into the new-made hinge ring. Halion stood, hands slack at his sides, and watched as if Dawn were climbing a hill he had long thought flattened. When the last stroke fell, the chamber trembled like a bird shaking water from its wings. The heart's music changed. It did not cease. It turned, like a river that finds a new bed. The terrible stillness loosened. Cold was still cold, but it did not proclaim itself king. The drake, robbed of its master's steadying note, fled through the ice with a rending that sounded almost like weeping. Snowspire groaned again, but now it sounded like a city exhaling. We came up from the root chamber like divers returning to the surface. The light in Snowspire seemed bluer now, and there was a wetness to the air, as if some slow thaw had acknowledged a beginning. The wolves outside no longer paced in precise circle. Their tracks wandered like the steps of creatures that had decided their own business mattered more than ours. Arandis laid the winter knife in Togo's hands. Keep this, she said. Let there be a hobbit's hand on this work henceforth, so that no one forgets. Small folk can hold great hinges. Doran took a stout cylinder of thunder snow and strapped it to his back. For Erebor, he said, and for the making of tools that do not break under frost. We will not bind the north, but we will learn its right name. Lerwin stood with her face turned toward a flow of light and ice. Lorien fades, she said softly, yet not sorrowfully. All things pass, and some pass into song. But I will carry a shard of winter's patience to the green places that remain, and teach them to endure not as stone endured, but as roots do. Edric breathed deep and clapped me on the back. There will be tales for the mead hall, he grinned. They will say Rohan rode into a mountain and came out laughing. That is a good thing for the young to hear. And Halion came last. The frost in his eyes had melted, and in its place was a puzzled warmth, like a man waking from a long watch to find he has slept after all. I am no king, he said, nor am I a listener any longer. I am only a ranger again. Only? I asked. He smiled, and some weight slid from him like a cloak at spring. Only a man who will keep moving and listen to leave instead of ice. We left Snowspire to its motion. It would travel the north as it always had, but no longer as a lid upon the world. It would be, if our craft and oath held, a hinge. Winter would come and go with dignity, not tyranny, and men would prepare for it with pick and song, not fear and silence. When at last Minas Tirith rose again before us, golden in late sun, King Elisar heard our tale on a balcony that looked toward Mindalluin, and his face grew grave and glad together. You have not unmade the north, he said. You have married it to the world. That is the work of this age. So I set pen to parchment and laid out the ledger of the Winterkeeper, with our new ring of words appended. In the Shire, a child of Buckleberry would someday read them and nod gravely, and then go out to test the frost for skating. In Lorien, Lerwin would sing to sap asleep in branch. In Erebor, Doran would fashion tools that sang clean under ice. In the Mark, Edric would tell of wolves that learned to mind their own wisdom, and Halion would slip along the eaves of Greenwood and the broken towers of Fornos, his step a little lighter, his gaze turned now and then toward dawn. As for me, Callan here of Lebanon, I wrote what had happened so that, when winter comes fierce to our doors and we despair, we remember there is a city that moves with the glacier and keeps the world from stopping. There are hands that will bleed to keep the seasons true. There is a hinge under heaven where stillness and motion can be reconciled. And if one day a wolf looks like a question, we will have our answer ready. For the world is not ended, and the snow does not have the last word. The last word, like the first, belongs to singing, and the hidden city of Snowspire, carried on the back of ages, goes on singing still. Epilogue. The hinge of the world. Years afterward, the sap rose earlier in the white tree, and the fountains of the court of the king spoke with brighter tongues. I, Calenhir of Lebanon, set my last ink upon the ledger of the winter keepers and closed it with both hands, as one shuts the lid of a chest, holding a friend's cloak, warm still with memory. Outside, Minas Tirith shone as if the mountain had agreed to be a lantern. The wind went clean from Mindalluin, and somewhere a mason laughed as a hammer struck true. Peace has many sounds. I had learned to hear them. The tale you have read was made in the north under a sky that could harden a man's breath into frost. Yet stories do not end where deeds end. They must be carried, like fire cupped against rain, until other hands can take them. So I set down what followed, that those who love the horse plains and the bee-glimmered orchards may number themselves heirs of a labor wrought where only wolves keep count, and that those who have known a long winter in the heart may know how spring at last took counsel with it. The letters and the road. In the first spring after Snowspire bent its course and became a hinge instead of a lock, messengers came to the White City with tidings that read like weather made into script. Shepherds in Lossernach found ewes lambing earlier, yet with stronger legs. The Anduin ran high but clear, as though it had learned from crystal. In Pelennor, where once ash lay, barley stood with spears upraised to sunlight. Far north, trappers in Dale wrote that a white fox littered twice, and the kits did not starve. Dwarves at Erebor reported that the ice beneath Ravenhill no longer creaked like a walking giant in the small hours. All this might be ordinary marvel if there is any such thing, but the letters bore a sameness of breath, as if the seasons had remembered how to breathe evenly. In the second spring, Ilmer King sent a woven banner of Rohan, horses white on green, with a note in his own strong hand, to hang where the north wind can make cheer with it whenever it is in the mood. I climbed the citadel stairs and hung it myself. The cloth cracked like a sail, and then softened, like a mare that knows the palm offered her holds no bridle. From Lorien, which is now a name that goes about the world like a scent rather than a place, there came a packet wrapped in gray. Lerwin had written little. The beaches here remember the taste of winter and do not fear it. They have taken to singing storm lullabies in the afternoons. I go often under the eaves of Erin Lesgalin and find there a green impatience that becomes wisdom when spoken to. Trees, like men, are teachable if the lesson is given as a song and not a blow. And from Erebor, a block of thunder snow arrived, veined like pale lightning and heavy as judgment, together with Doran's scrawl, for the vaults of the king. It will not melt if kept out of idleness. It prefers work. We set it in the house of the jewel. The glaziers of Minas Tirith swore, laughing uneasily, that the light in that chamber slowed slightly in passing, and the apprentices, who have time enough to watch light do anything, confirmed it with serious faces. Craft breeds certainty. Wonder keeps it honest. But what made my hand shake most was a small, neat letter from Buckleberry. The ink was brown with tea. The wax bore a device of a river bend and a jaunty leaf. Calenhir, if I may, we have not frozen, which is a disappointment to those who wished for late skating, but a relief to those who prefer not to test pond ice with their front door. The north field that always sulked now deigns to yield potatoes with a decent opinion of themselves. I keep the winter knife hung over the kitchen hearth, edge carefully wrapped, you will be glad to know. And from time to time I take it down, and remember that very great hinges may be hidden in very small latches. If you see Doran, tell him he owes me 2 slices of seed cake and a story for every tooth he knocked from that drake. Yours in warmth at last, Togo Brandybuck. I laughed aloud, to the scandal of 3 archivists and 1 dignified candle. Thus do small folk break the shell of ceremony, so the yoke of joy may be had. The King's Counsel and the Northern Word. When we made our report, Elisar set his hand upon the ledger and listened without haste. It is a harvest to speak to a patient king. After I had done, he said, "The world has been wounded and healed, as all living things are. There will be scars, and there will be seasons we cannot mend by decree. But you and your companions have not tried to still the world. You have taught it to walk with a staff, not lie down with a chain." Then he bade that a new office be named, not loud with trumpets, but firm with oaths, the wardens of the hinge, to hold lore concerning Snowspire, to carry tidings south and north, to mind the crafts that make winter a neighbor and not a tyrant. "Let none presume ownership of the north," he said. "Let none despise it either. We are tenants of all our weather." So it was that I found myself not retiring to a firelit desk, but riding once more with a satchel of letters and a mind full of maps. I thought to be a scribe. I became a messenger. It is one and the same thing if the message is good. We went first to Anuminas, which was then a building dream more than a city, stones laid out like notes waiting their song. The king planted a white birch by the lake and named it Memory. He spoke there with Halion. Halion arrived out of the dusk, with the quiet certainty of a man who knows every twig in the field by the way it ticked under his step. He was leaner, as if the winter had finally let go of bones it had clung to. The frost that had once glazed his gaze was gone. He bowed and did not apologize. Men who have held a watch too long have no words for it. Elisar, who has kept longer watches than any, asked nothing. They walked the shore together and said little, and that little was enough. Later by the fire, Halion said to me, "When the wind comes off Lake Evendim now, it does not call me to stand. It invites me to walk." I wrote that sentence in the margin of the ledger and ringed it with ink, that I might find it when my own feet grew stubborn. He taught the wardens the northern word, that opens no doors and silences no rivers, but changes the way a man holds his cloak. Halveth, which means, as near as I can translate, the good weight. We spoke it when we took up our packs. We spoke it when we shouldered grief. We learned to feel when stillness is a mercy and when it is a theft. Of rings remade and crafts renewed. At Erebor, they learned to fold threads of thunder snow into steel, like veins into leaf. Blades wrought so did not frostbite the hand when used long upon winter's work. Hinges hung so did not seize in rime. Plowshares shod so bit clean and gave back a faint chiming when they struck hidden stones, as if to say, "Here is the edge between patience and stubbornness." Doran sent one such plowshare to Pelennor with a note. "Turn the field with this, and tell me if the furrow sings. If it does not, you forged it wrong." In the houses of healing, the masters learned to cool fevers with small crystal plates laid at the pulse. "Not too long," they cautioned. "Winter is a guest, not a physician." They claimed that dreams turned kinder beneath such coolness, and that grief, when set a moment upon such a plate and given back to the breast, lay more evenly. I asked one old woman cured of a wound that burned when the weather changed what the crystal had done. "It told the pain the season," she said dryly, "and the pain had the decency to obey." In Ithilien, Prince Faramir and Lady Eowyn oversaw the making of winter garden, courts walled high and set with flutes of glass that held cold in kindly measure. Their roses blushed in frost and did not surrender, and children played at being winter keepers, stamping solemnly round circles traced in chalk and speaking oaths that broke into giggles. Eowyn laughed to hear them and wept once in the same breath, thinking perhaps of a white house in far snow and a brother's voice. Then she dried her tears and taught the children how to keep a watch without forgetting to run. Not all crafts prospered. Some men tried to steep wine in thunder snow and make a vintage that would never sour. It cured into something like honesty. Merchants disliked it. Others set thin shards into window panes so that time would move gently at noon, and their siestas might be longer. Their cats grew confused and stayed awake all night. In mercy, the men removed the shards. It is well that folly should surround wisdom like a hedge. A wise thing grown in a field without laughter will be eaten by pride. The trial, winter, and the standing song. In the 5th year after the hinge was forged, a winter came down like a drawn blade. Old men named it kin to the fell winter of elder days, but law-kept and dignified, as a wolf bound with a silver thread is still deadly, yet understands courtesy. The Anduin mailed over from bank to bank. The White Mountains shone like a crown hammered newly. In the north, the long night laid its cheek to the glacier and listened. We feared the worst, for victory is seldom the last word men say to fear. But at Snowspire, Arandis and her folk had taught their children the standing song, a gathering on the first night of deep frost, when the city, hearing men say we are here, would answer, so am I. Torches were lifted in rings. Blood was not demanded, though some cut their palms in old remembrance. But bread was shared, and the old ledger read aloud where the script speaks of choices. Those who felt the heart call to stillness were not shamed, but set to tasks requiring steady hand, spinning thread fine as spider silk, trimming crystal lamps, teaching the small to sit quiet long enough to hear the glacier hum. If winter asks for your attention, Arandis said, pay it, but pay it coin, not your name. The wardens brought that custom south and west. In Minas Tirith, we learned to make a smaller ring in the 6th circle. We lifted candles. We spoke the names of our dead, and the names did not freeze in our mouths. They became breath enough to warm fingers. In the mark, the standing song was taken onto the snow-stubbled mead, where men stamped in broad circles and the horses snorted steaming wreaths and pushed their soft noses into human palms, astonished that such clumsy creatures had learned to herd coal. The trial winter broke not by our strength, but because we had learned a patience that was not surrender. When thaw came, it did not crash. It unstitched. Rivers went in hemmed seams. Roofs shed snow like shrugged capes. In Snowspire, they said the hinge had held. In Minas Tirith, I wrote, season, like sorrow, is safest when it has a door. The companions after of my comrades, who were the measure by which I learned my own stature, hear now a little, that your hearts may know where to send their toasts. Lerwin did not fade, as the golden wood did. She took up a wandering tunic and wore the wind's brooch. She went where trees stand uncertain between courage and sleep, and taught them both. I met her once under beeches near Amon Lank. She had braided her hair with slivers of thunder snow, not as jewelry, but as memory. I am learning the language of trunks, she said, laying her cheek to a beech and smiling as if listening to a long joke. It is slow, but the punchline lasts a century. Tell the king that patience is a kind of music. I told him. He already knew. Doran, son of Nar, married a smith with arms like braided rope and a laugh that made small gemstones jump. They forged together a bell-tone plow that sang true in dale, and a hinge pin for the great gate of Erebor that never froze in hoar. In his beard, Doran kept one of the drake's teeth, polished down to a dull gleam. A reminder, he would say, when an apprentice asked, of what breaks when you press the wrong way, and what opens when you press the right. He came twice to Snowspire with caravans bearing salt and song. He drank little in those halls, for even dwarves know some thirsts are not for ale. Edric of the Eastfold took to telling our tale in mead halls, and the young men of Rohan, who fancy courage as a cloak to be donned in a day, learned from him that laughter is a helm you must grow into. He married a woman who raced him across the horse plains and beat him every other week. When the trial winter came, he organized the standing rings so that no foal would be born unwatched, no widow's house go unbanked with snow. When he grew gray, he did not slow much, but taught the foals to take the bit as if it were a kiss. And that is a good legacy. Halion took up his watch again, but he no longer mistook standing for virtue when walking was needful. Some nights the frost found him and knocked. He would rise and go out and give it an hour, and then send it away politely. He grew fond of dawns, which is a miracle for a ranger. Once he came to Minas Tirith, silently as ever, and left me a small bundle, a strip of cloth he had worn the day we broke the ring, a slender shard of clear dark, and a note with 6 words, I am learning to be warm. I keep that scrap locked where I keep my courage. Arandis, whose hair white as rime, had seemed a banner of winter's claim, lived to a fine and wrinkled age. In her last year, the glacier bore Snowspire past a ravine where frost pines leaned like listening elders. She sat at the root chamber's rim, with the heart's new music purling through the bones of the world, and smiled as a woman smiles at a child's breathing in the next room. "Not mine to make, not mine to keep, mine to greet," she said softly. Those were her last words, and we carved them above the ledger's place. As for Togo Brandybuck, he never learned to walk solemnly for more than a dozen heartbeats together, and thus kept sense in all of us. He founded a winter fair in Bucklebury called the Frost Merry, where pies are baked with a glaze so clear the stars consider themselves improved by looking in. In a corner of his parlor hangs the winter knife wrapped in linen and bound by a shire ribbon, and above it is written in a hobbit hand, "For cutting the cake of silence." And I, Callan here, grew old the way scribes do, with ink on the knuckles and a spine that curves the way a bow does when it will still shoot true. Children have brought me snow in cupped hands and asked me whether it is made of music. I tell them yes, and show them how to listen before it melts. Of the sea and the white north. Once, in my middle years when the hills of Lebanon called me home, I traveled west to the mouths of Anduin and stood where the river learns to be a guest of a wider water. I thought perhaps to see a white sail vanish upon a road that has only one direction. Instead, I met a man of the Phalos with hair salt bright who sold ropes and knew the talk of gulls better than he knew his own. Over hot fish we spoke of winter. "The sea has her own," he said, "and when she is in certain moods, she sends it inland to see if we still respect it. Your hinge," he had heard, "teaches men to bow without crawling. It is a sailor's wisdom applied to snow." I approve. He told me that south along the coast, marsh birds nested in a season they had forgotten, and their cries made a pattern on the wind like network. "The world is mending in places we do not expect," he said. "We had better mend in ourselves, or we shall be the last ragged bits left over. It is well to be instructed by a man whose words smell of tar and truth." And far to the north, beyond Snowspire, beyond dwarf roads and the patience of rangers, rumor brought us tales from hunters in Forodwaith, lean as hunger and bright as ice. They spoke of a place where, at the late summer's end, the glacier lifted a wide, imperceptible sigh, and a fog lay over the blue for 3 days and 3 nights. When it cleared, the ice had settled as a great book settles when the reader turns a heavy page. "The world is reading itself," one hunter said, unashamed of his poetry. I set that into the ledger with bold letters and thought, let it be so. The last keeping. In the 15th year after the hinge, we gathered in Minas Tirith's 6th circle for a standing song that was no longer only for winter. Children came with lanterns painted in thin strokes like veins in frost. Bakers brought loaves glazed to shine like little lakes. There were few alive then who had stood with us beneath the glacier, but many who had warmed their hands at the fire of our telling. This too is a kind of fellowship. King Elisar stood beneath the banner of Rohan that Eomer had sent, and beneath the white tree that had become as ordinary and as wondrous as the sun rising. He said no kingly thing. He simply held a candle and nodded, as a man nods to his neighbor across a shared fence. We sang, not loud, not in triumph, but in the tone men use when they speak to a child sleeping lightly. Rest and wake, go and return, be strong and be soft, keep door and open it. And there was, I swear, a sense in the air of something great and simple, consenting to our small wisdom. Afterward, a girl shy as the crescent moon tugged my sleeve. "Master Callan here," she stammered. "Is it true there is a city that moves?" Her candle's light made a warm room of the air around her face. I thought of halls blue as breathed glass, of bridges arched like the ribs of whales, of sealed rings broken and reforged, of a hobbit's hands steady over fear, of a ranger stepping back from a long silence, of a dwarf's axe and an elf's quiet singing, of a Rohirrim's laugh racing the cold. "Yes," I said, "and it keeps the world from stopping." "Then," she said solemnly, "I will keep moving too." "Do so," I answered, "and when you must stop, stop as winter does now, for rest, not for rule." She smiled and went to find her parents in the glow. I stayed and watched the candles go out one by one, knowing that darkness is not the enemy of light, but its hour of proving. Dawn does better work when night has had its say. A little map, folded. In my last winter, when the taste of mint was beginning to remind me of spring more than promise, and I had to be helped down the broad stair of the archives, Togo came to Minas Tirith, older, softer round the middle, eyes undiminished. He brought a map, folded into a map, folded into a map, as hobbit maps are. It showed the Shire in the middle of everything, with the north drawn more generously than cartographers prefer, and the sea drawn like an old friend who drops in unannounced. In one clean corner, he had drawn a star, and beneath it he wrote, "Snowspire goes here, wherever here has gone to." We laughed until I had to sit. Then Togo grew serious and set the winter knife upon my table. "I've kept it long enough," he said. "It likes to visit." Teat. The knife's wrapped weight felt like a memory settling into the hand I no longer trusted to hold anything for long. I untied the ribbon. The edge did not glint. It remembered light without needing to boast of it. "We went north 3 summers ago," Togo said. "My grandsons and I. We stood on a black rock and saw a blue far thing move under the noon, as if a thought had crossed a mind. They asked me if cities can be quiet. I told them yes. They asked me if quiet can be brave. I told them, ask Halion. We went looking. We did not find him. I think that is exactly as it should be." I looked toward Mindalluin, which kept its snow with a modesty I have always admired. "Do you suppose," I said, "that the hinge will hold when we are gone?" Togo shrugged in that ungovernable hobbit way that throws down fear as one throws down a napkin when the dish is empty and enough has been eaten. "The hinge is made of more than rings," he said. "It's made of choices. Those don't rust if you teach them to children." Then, because it is wicked to end a serious talk without a joke to keep it honest, he added, "Besides, if it fails, I expect Doran to come pounding out of the mountain and scold the very weather. And I expect Lerwin to sing the storm embarrassed, and Edric to laugh at the frost until it blushes and melts. And Halion, well, he will be wherever the world has left one last quiet place unattended. He will attend it, and then leave, as is polite. We drank to that with cider that made us hum low in the throat, like Content Hive. The last page, now it is the turn of a trembling hand to lay down a steady thing. I have left room in the ledger after this page. White space is not ignorance, it is invitation. Others will come to write how the heart's music learned new mode, how the wardens failed sometimes and mended oftener, how winter came fit and fair and went away in time, as truest guests do. Perhaps a ranger's child will pen a line that becomes proverb in the north. Perhaps a dwarf will draw a hinge that helps a door 1,000 years from now swing in perfect silence. Perhaps a hobbit will write a recipe for frost glaze that makes kings lick their fingers. I am content to make room. I have learned this. The world does not end, it turns. The first men to discover turning named it fate, or doom, or wheel. We named it hinge and set our shoulders to it for a season, and the door of the year began once more to open and close in kindness. If ever again a wolf looks like a question, we know now how to answer, with bread, with watch, with ring and song, with a laughter that does not deny fear, but keeps it in measure, with a patience that is not a chain, but a chair for the weary heat to sit on a while. When I go at last, let it be in a winter that knows its work and does not pretend to sovereignty. Open the window, let the good weight of cold lie upon the sill. Set a small plate of crystal at my wrist, not to still me, but to steady me while the world turns a page. Put the winter knife on the table nearby, not for defense, but for remembrance. Lay the map Togo drew across my knees, so that even as my eyes learn a farther light, I may smile at the notion that Snowspire goes here, wherever here has gone to, and say these words, if any must be said. He kept moving, he kept watch. He learned the standing song. That is epitaph enough for a man who once thought his life would be a line in another's book. So ends, and so begins, the keeping of the hidden city of Snowspire. Not a crown upon the north brow, but a clasp. Not a lock upon the heart, but a hinge. Not an end of storms, but their stewardship. A song in key with frost and thaw. And if you listen, when the first pale light spreads thin as milk over rooftops, you may hear it, the far blue city going by, singing not to stop the world, but to keep it steady while we pass from one bright room to the next. Calanhir of Lebanon, warden of the hinge, in the year 15 of the Fourth Age, with the ink still warm and the snow considerate at the window.